And we've had some really good success with those on cars. So,
why aren't the owners, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but why aren't they doing that already? Because obviously these thefts have happened over a reasonable amount of time now. Why don't people care if they lose their diggers?
I think they do. Sometimes I think it's a case of people becoming a bit complacent, a bit blasé, being busy. I could understand owner-operators, contractors, being really busy with all the construction that's going on. But sometimes we all just need to take a little bit of time, protect our property, and just safeguard it, make sure that we're not leaving it out in places where it can be targeted by thieves.
So it's economic to take a digger to a chop shop and cut up the digger in parts and then resell the parts, rather than actually flog off a whole digger.
Yeah, so that's one possible scenario. So there will be valuable metals, the likes of copper, brass, bronze, etc., as well as the heavy iron, of course. And we have, out of the 16 that have been stolen across County's Manukau district in the last 6 months, we have recovered 4 of those. So that's only 25%. So the rest are going somewhere.
But no prosecutions, no prosecutions, Chris. How come no prosecutions with the ones that you've recovered?
Yeah, so the 4 that we have recovered weren't in the possession of anyone that we could pin charges on. So that's one of the things where we need the help from the public. If the public are around and they see something suspicious happening at a construction site around a digger or just in general, then our advice is to phone 111 and we'll do our best to get there as soon as we can.
You've probably put a stop to it for a while now, haven't you, with the publicity now?
Well, I'm not sure. And look, the other thing I wanted to raise was the fact that the thieves that are taking these diggers are more than likely to make themselves look like they're going to fit in. So high-vis vests, boots, that construction type look. But if there's activity happening at a peculiar time, later in the evening or on the weekend when no one else is around, then that's when we want to know about it. And, catching someone with the digger in their possession gives us the highest rate of holding someone to account.
Good to talk to you, and thank you for coming on with the Tale of the Diggers, Chris Barry, Inspector Chris Barry from County's Manukau. Now there'll be some legitimate operators on the weekend trying to work late.
I know.
Before we go, the safe level of booze, and I'm sure people have noticed this big study, no safe level of alcohol consumption, University of Washington, it's in Lancet, huge research over huge age ranges and over a number of years. Were you surprised? Is this going to change your drinking habits?
No, not at all. I don't imbibe that often and that regularly, so I'm just going to keep tippling myself. And whatever happens. I think there are lots of things you can do that are not great for your health. I don't.
Yes, that's true.
I find any particular solace in drafting huge amounts of alcohol.
In the end, life's not that great for your health. Push comes to shove.
Well, that's exactly right, isn't it? I mean, everything is risky. And although I think alcohol is a colossal global health issue, if you are having a drink every now and again, you've got to wonder if a sort of isolated sedentary life would be better for you or not.
Joe McCarroll, Mark Rehu, thank you. That's the panel.
Tō te mai rai hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint. Tonight, the PM says she had no input into the Speaker's decision to drop the inquiry into who leaked Simon Bridges' expenses. The drugs don't work, so why do so many people use them? Anusha Bradley and Whanganui. The Residential Tenancies Act under review. Proposals include scrapping no-cause tenancy terminations, increasing notice periods and limiting rent increases to 1 a year. A loser in an American gaming competition in Jacksonville opens fire on his fellow competitors. Auckland churches hit back at massive rate hikes, some of almost 7,000%. And NASA offers internships to New Zealanders. Yes, you really can be a space cadet.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon, ko Katrina Batten aho. The Prime Minister is rejecting an accusation by the National Party's leader that she had any influence over the decision to halt an inquiry into the leak of Simon Bridges' expenses. The Speaker, Trevor Mallard, pulled the plug on the investigation after details about an anonymous text message from a person claiming to be the leaker were made public. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Simon Bridges says the Speaker stopped the investigation on Friday for no basis other than the Prime Minister said it was an internal matter for National. But Jacinda Ardern says she's been saying the same thing for weeks. She says right back when the leak was first revealed, she said publicly it was an internal matter for the National Party. Ms Ardern says the Speaker gave both her and Simon Bridges a heads up on Friday that he was going to call off the inquiry before he made the announcement. Atu i te whare Pārimata, ko Chris Bramwell aho.
The Crown has told the High Court 2 prison officers used excessive force on a prisoner and a third tried to cover it up. Desmond Whaafoy is charged with injuring a prisoner and Wiramu Paikea with causing grievous bodily harm. Viju Devasi is charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice. The prosecutor, David Wiseman, told the High Court in Auckland that Mr Whaafoy was attacked by 3 prisoners, one of whom stabbed him. Backup soon arrived and the prisoners were held by guards. Mr Wiseman said Mr Whaafoy then kicked a prisoner who was on the ground in the head 3 times and Mr Paikea broke the man's ankle and leg. He said Mr Devasi went to the control room and moved a CCTV camera away from the incident. About 500 gang members gathered in Whanganui today for the tangi of a murdered Mangel mob member. Kevin Ratana was shot dead outside his Castle Cliff home on Tuesday. A Mangel mob woman, Marcia, says it's the largest tangi she's ever seen.
I've witnessed a lot of unification with the other chapters, other gangs, and it's that in itself is a big thing for New Zealand gangs, especially when we get run down quite a lot.
Marcia says the large numbers are driven by a deep love for Kevin Ratana. Extra police and their Eagle helicopter have been patrolling Whanganui today. The police are still searching for the offenders and have said the victim and offenders were gang affiliates who are known to each other and the police. Landlords hope the government will also consider the problems they face in its review of the Residential Tenancies Act. The Housing Minister, Phil Twyford, wants to introduce measures to make life easier for renters and has released a discussion document. Scrapping no-cause tenancy terminations, increasing the notice landlords have to give to end a tenancy, and limiting rent increases to once a year are all included in the proposal. The head of the Property Investors Federation, Andrew King, says landlords should get a look in too, and the Minister has been open to that.
One of the biggest problems that we actually have is rent arrears. It's the major cause of applications to the Tenancy Tribunal. It really ties up a lot of their time. So we feel that at the same time, as we're going through this discussion, we should look at things which can help the property providers as well.
Andrew King from the Property Investors Federation. The University of Otago is building a new dental clinic and training facility in South Auckland. Costing $28 million, it'll be built on land owned by the county's Manukau District Health Board at its Manukau Super Clinic. Sarah Robson has the details.
The university says the clinic will help meet some of the high health needs in the local community and help improve oral health outcomes. Patients will be able to receive treatment from students under supervision at a lower cost than they would otherwise. Almost 50 final year dentistry students will be assigned to the clinic at any one time. The university says the clinic will provide students with diverse practical learning opportunities and increase their understanding of people from a wide range of backgrounds. Construction is due to start later this year and be completed in 2020. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The authorities in far north Queensland say more people have been arrested as a search continues for those who abandoned a fishing boat in the Daintree River. Yesterday, fishermen reported seeing people get off the boat in crocodile-infested waters, then flee into the rainforest near Cape Kimberley. The Queensland Police Minister, Mark Ryan, says 15 people detained on behalf of the Australian Border Force are now in custody, up from the 11 reported earlier. The police are stopping and checking cars in their hunt for about a dozen more suspected asylum seekers. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport. New Zealand Rugby wants taxpayer money to battle the overseas player train. Both New Zealand Rugby's chief executive, Steve Tew, and the All Blacks spoke to the Prime Minister and Sports Minister at the Bledisloe Cup test in Auckland. They highlighted the increasing challenge of retaining players in the face of cash-rich clubs from the Northern Hemisphere. The All Blacks' first five, Beauden Barrett, has reportedly been offered $3.5 million a year to join a French club after next year's World Cup. Steve Tew says government help might be needed.
We continue to spend somewhere between $5 and $7 million a year more than we earn. 36% of our costs are fixed, goes to our professional players. And so if that 36% is under pressure because the price of players in the international market is continuing to escalate with no real science behind it other than just these very wealthy club owners wanting to have the best team, then that's a pressure point.
Steve Tew, the head of New Zealand Rugby. World number one Rafael Nadal and American Serena Williams are the big names on court tonight for the opening round of the US Tennis Open in New York. The tournament is celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Open era, with Nadal seeking to defend the men's title and Williams chasing her 7th US Open title. Baseball New Zealand have announced the name of their team to compete in the Australian baseball competition. They'll be called Auckland Tuatara. And the New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko has finished tied for 8th at the Canadian Open in Saskatchewan. That's the news.
A big problem.
They turned up one day and I was high as a kite. The day my babies got taken was the day I started thinking straight.
A big issue.
The message is that this is an Ireland that stands for truth. Even if Pope Francis continues to dodge, avoid and lie by omission, we know the truth.
A big win.
It's been a very weird, crazy whirlwind, but yeah, it hasn't really sunk in.
The big programme, Morning Report from 6 every weekday on RNZ National. Then on 9 to noon, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern addresses the big questions of business confidence. And after 10, Rana Devonport, who's leaving Auckland Art Gallery to take charge of the Art Gallery of South Australia, the first female director in its 137-year history. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Mainly fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with isolated showers developing. Waikato to Manawatu, including the central high country, mainly fine apart from areas of low cloud or fog tomorrow morning. Isolated evening showers about the central high country. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine. Horowhenua to Wellington, Nelson, Marlborough and Buller, mainly fine. Isolated showers tomorrow about the Tararua Range and Marlborough Sounds. Westland, cloudy, patchy rain, clearing tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with a few showers. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, rain about Fiordland with some heavy falls and snow to 500 metres, spreading east overnight. Clearing tomorrow morning, apart from a few showers remaining about Fiordland. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers tomorrow. It's 5:08, and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. Coming up tonight, why did the Speaker drop the inquiry into who leaked Simon Bridges' expenses? Also tonight, the Residential Tenancy Act under review, Australian politics and the shambles that appears to be the Liberal Party, and much, much more. But we're going to begin with more gun violence rocking the US. 2 people shot dead at a gaming competition in the state of Florida. The man believed to be the offender was also killed. Now, such is the frequency of gun murders in the US that this one might barely have warranted a mention outside local news channels, were it not for the fact a losing competitor appears to have been responsible. And the event was being live streamed to a viewing audience as the shots began to ring out. And also, Florida is a state at the sharp end of the gun control debate. And this will get louder and louder. In 2016, 49 people were killed at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, while in February this year, 17 people were killed in the Parkland school shooting, of course. Today's shooting happened at an online gaming competition in Jacksonville. Elizabeth Brown has more.
Competitors and spectators were packed into the game bar at Jacksonville Landing in Florida for a regional qualifier for a new football video game when shots rang out. A live stream of the tournament caught the chilling moment when a red laser dot appeared on the chest of a player and the sound of shots sparked panic throughout the complex.
Screaming, just shooting, I heard gunshots, people just running, pushing each other, just getting out of the landing. trying to get out of there.
People was coming out through the back screaming. People was coming out through the front. People was shot. Like, I seen the girl. She's not little, but she's young. Like, she probably was a high schooler. I seen a grown man, like, shot, like terrified. Like,
he worked there, too.
And he worked there. Like, I've never seen a grown man so terrified.
Gamer Ryan Ailman fled to the toilets in terror.
I opened the door to peek to see if it was safe. And then in my head, I'm like, just run. Don't even look nowhere, just run. Like, get out of there. And I'm just panicking. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, should I stay here? Like, what if he's coming back? Like, I don't know what's going on. So I just opened the door and I ran. And I had seen, like, in the corner of my eye, like, 3 bodies on the floor unconscious. Like, I'm still in shock right now.
When the shooting was over, 3 people, including the gunman, were dead. Jacksonville Sheriff Mike Williams briefed reporters.
There were 3 deceased individuals at the scene, one of those being the suspect who took his own life. There were 9 victims transported by JFRD to area hospitals. 7 of those had gunshot wounds. In addition, there were 2 additional gunshot victims that self-transported themselves to local hospitals. I'm happy to report that they are all in stable condition at this time.
The police have identified the gunman as 24-year-old David Katz, who travelled to the tournament from Baltimore. Mike Williams says the police and FBI are trying to piece together his movements.
We have located and impounded the suspect's vehicle, and a search of that is pending. But we believe he stayed somewhere locally last night, maybe at a hotel. We know that the suspect used at least 1 handgun to commit this act, and we are working again with our partners at ATF on that aspect of the investigation.
Jacksonville Mayor Lenny Curry says it's a terrible day for the city.
Today, this evening, and tonight, Jacksonville is mourning. We have faced an occurrence that is all too common. To all those in anyone watching, I say this: pray for Jacksonville as we deal with this senseless tragedy.
And once again, Americans, and in particular Florida residents, are asking when the violence will end.
Politicians, wake up, because the people that you're supposed to be representing are dying. You stop sitting on your butt, stop collecting checks, and do something. You guys are voting into office for a reason.
Jacksonville was already reeling from another deadly shooting over the weekend. 1 person was killed and 2 others were injured in a shooting after a high school football game on Friday, blamed on youth gangs. Politically, it's a crucial time. Florida's primary election takes place this week, with gun control certain to be front and centre in the minds of voters. For Checkpoint, call Elizabeth Brown, TNA.
30 minutes past 5. The Prime Minister has flatly rejected accusations from National that she had any influence whatsoever over the Speaker's decision to halt an inquiry into the leak of Simon Bridges' expenses. Trevor Mallard pulled the plug on the investigation after details about an anonymous text message from a person claiming to be the leaker and a National Party MP were made public on RNZ. Jacinda Ardern says she's played no role in that. She told Checkpoint on Friday night she believes the National Party should look internally for the leaker. So where are they looking? Who's doing the looking now? And why did the Speaker stop? Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Simon Bridges says neither the Speaker nor the Prime Minister know the identity of the leaker. The National leader says he'll conduct his own inquiry to get to the bottom of the matter and maintains the leaker could be a parliamentary staffer.
The tragedy of all of this is that the Speaker had an investigation ongoing. He stopped it on Friday for no basis that I can see. Other than that, the Prime Minister had said it was an internal matter for the National Party.
But Jacinda Ardern says she's been saying the same thing for weeks.
Right back when this issue first came up, my view then, which I said publicly, was that this was an internal matter for the National Party. I still hold that view and still also maintain this is not an issue that has anything to do with us.
Jacinda Ardern says the Speaker gave both her and Simon Bridges a heads up on Friday that he was going to call off the inquiry just before he made the announcement. Asked why National was trying to turn the spotlight onto the government, Ms Ardern said that was just politics.
As I've always said throughout all of this, it's always struck me from what I've seen in the public reporting, because that's the amount of information I've had on this, that it's always struck me that it would be an issue for the National Party. But look, it's politics, and I guess they're panning around looking for someone else to raise this issue with, or at least point the finger back in. It's a matter for them to manage internally, and that's always been my view.
Simon Bridges is planning to carry out his own inquiry and says he's talked with effectively all of his MPs who he says are supportive of that move. He says he asked the police why they won't tell him who the leaker is.
Effectively, they say these are decisions that they make every day. They err on the side of privacy. That's their protocol, I think, unless there is some overarching reason, such as safety, that means they need to act in a different way.
After the announcement that the Speaker was canning the inquiry, National's shadow leader of the House, Jerry Brownlee, said it was an appalling move. The Speaker says the Parliamentary Service will cooperate when National decides how to run its own inquiry, though Mr Brownlee was not thrilled at hearing that.
That's Mr Mallard, the Speaker of the House, turning his finger on the opposition, the 56 MPs, almost half the Parliament who make up the National Party, and saying, you are guilty. Now, that's not how a Speaker operates.
Jerry Brownlee says National's considering whether or not to take any formal action against the Speaker. The Speaker's on holiday overseas and declined Checkpoint's request for an interview. Atu i te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramalaho.
16 minutes past 5. Churches in Auckland are begging their mayor and councillors to be their saviour, or else they say their recent biblical rates rises could force them to close. Churches in New Zealand are rates exempt by law. Any building used primarily for religious purposes is. But after an Auckland Council review of rates exempt properties, some churches have been slapped with rates rises of around 6,000 or 7,000%. Yes, you heard that figure correctly, 6,000 or 7,000. The operational arm of Auckland Council says it legally can't reverse its decision. So now churches are begging the political arm for a reprieve. Zach Fleming has more.
So our bill is going to be $11,500.
St Matthew's in Auckland CBD's bill, it's gone up from $218. That's an increase of 5,679%. And that's not even the biggest jump. A nearby church went up from $400 to $28,000. That's a nearly 7,000% increase. Vicar of St Matthew's Helen Jacoby says that bill would cripple the church.
In order to afford that bill, we would have to not do maintenance on a Category 1 historic building, which we look after for the people of Auckland.
It's come from a council review of all non-rateable properties. Any property in New Zealand used principally for religious worship is rates exempt. The council's review identified 402 churches that the council says are clearly using part of their land for business purposes. In St Matthew's case, that's its office space underneath the church.
And of course the offices are used for the administration of the worship building, so in our mind they are used therefore for religious purposes.
Obviously, where we are now, the main part of the church that's used for worship, the council deems this to be used for religious purposes, so it's exempt from rates. But if you walk down the stairs at the back of the building and into the church's offices, this area isn't rates exempt anymore. Even though the church says that the offices are used for administration purposes for the church, they have to pay rates on them now. Auckland Council says the offices are 6% of the land, so the church has to pay 6% of what the property's rates bill is. So this all raises the question, what about things like bathrooms? A bathroom isn't used for religious purposes, so should a church have to pay rates for its bathrooms? For St Matthew's, that's a no, and Auckland Council is standing by its rates assessments. Head of Rates Debbie Acott says the council signalled this was coming and has sought both internal and external legal advice to check whether it can charge churches rates in this way.
We are going with what our legal advisors have told us, so the portion used for religious purposes, religious worship, is considered the portion just used solely for worship.
So you've extensively sought out whether you can. Have you thought about whether you should?
We just have to comply with legislation. So I don't think there's been any case law on this so far, but this is the advice that we've received.
So the only way to stop these new rates bills is a last-minute political reprieve from the mayor or councillors.
They can decide whether or not there is a policy on top of that to give some relief to different sections of the community. So over the next few months, our finance policy team will be taking some papers to the Finance and Performance Committee to see if they would like to do that for churches.
Manurewa Papakura Ward Councillor Daniel Newman wants the rates changes reversed. Otherwise, He says churches in his area
would simply not be able to provide the very important services that my community needs.
What are those kinds of services that the churches
provide?
Well,
churches in my neck of the woods provide food banks, counselling services for people with addictions, support for refugees, values-based education, really important services that are intrinsic to the community that I represent, intrinsic to the people of Auckland, I'd suggest.
Mr Newman says the decision should have been a political one, not an operational one.
No decision had been taken at a political level. There had been information about a review, but no decision had been taken, that the invoices had simply been sent out, and that obviously those of us from the elected membership side of the council are asking questions as to why this has happened.
We asked the Mayor Phil Goff for comment. He wasn't available. Churches have been advised they don't have to pay the first bill due on Friday until councillors and the Mayor make a decision. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
And Nick Munro was the cameraman for Zach's stories. 21 minutes past 5, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Water contamination by firefighting foam chemicals is playing havoc with residents living directly in its path. The list of regions now with polluted groundwater includes Auckland, Northland, Taranaki and Marlborough. Manawatu was meant to be the test case for how well officials handled the PFAS contamination countrywide. Instead, it's been a little like David in Gumboots versus Goliath in Gumboots. Phil Pennington and video journalist Richard Tindler went to Manawatu and compiled this report.
Here I am in the very pretty Bulls Domain. Right beneath my feet is one of the bores where they sample the water. And when they did that, they were surprised to find that the foam chemical contamination is in the reticulated town supply. The thing is, when I drink this, it's not acutely toxic. It's what the health authorities tell us. I'm not going to fall down dead on the spot right here. But every time I drink it, it's building up in my system with the chemical.
Over the nearby Rangatike River, the paddocks where Andy Russell has been running deer on the family farm for decades are as green as ever. But below the ground, the contamination is above safe drinking water levels.
There we go. So the black bits are manganese, but you can't see the PFAS compounds. They're in there, and that's what the problem's all about.
That chemical has changed everything for Liz and Bruce Kinlock. They thought they were gently winding down, exchanging dairy cows for beef cattle, when they moved back 12 years ago to the land her great-grandfather was the first settler on.
But it had meaning, being the land again. You love the land.
And love this particular bit of land.
Yeah, well, it meant something.
We've grown up here with the defence around all our life.
Yeah, it meant something to us.
Good land, says husband Bruce, for cattle, cropping, fattening, growing vegetables.
And is it still good now that you've got this contamination? Scientists say it is, but I don't believe them. What do you think?
I reserve my judgment. I think it's been poisoned.
The trouble is, they share a fence with the Defence Force's Ohakia Air Base. They can still farm, but the leachate from the base has delivered a king hit to their options and to the value if they wanted to sell.
In the very beginning, it was very difficult to get any answers from Defence as to what was going to happen. And I mean, we're 8 or 9 months on and actually worse off because we're finding our tests are going up all the time, but not knowing where we're going.
We sought an interview with the commander at the Ohakia base. Instead, squadron leader Mike Wood met us at the airbase's security checkpoint.
Hi.
Mike Wood.
Hello, Mr. Wood. Phil Pennington, Radio New Zealand.
Gotcha. I've heard you on there.
I have you?
Once or twice, yeah.
Okay.
So what is it you're after?
Well, we've come up...
You're not recording?
We are recording.
Turn that off, please. Turn that off, please.
The squadron leader told us we couldn't come onto the base to film and that there was no one we could interview. Later, at a committee meeting of farmers at the Kinlock's home, uncertainty is high, but so too are hopes for quick action on a government-funded water scheme. However, the Manawatu District Mayor Helen Warboys poses the key question of why some tests show the level of chemicals is still rising.
Well, they've done 4 rounds of testing now, and we were told by the scientists right up front that this chemical moves in water and it flushes itself out with water. So you would have assumed, being a non-scientist, that after a year of testing we would have started to see some decline in the levels of chemicals in the testing, particularly on the properties directly beside the base. But that's not the case. In fact, we're still seeing high results of chemicals in the water. So you have to say, is that because we haven't isolated the contamination on site?
2 Environment Ministry officials are at the meeting but cannot answer her questions, even though that ministry is leading the government's PFAS response. Of the regions that defence and industry have contaminated, Manawatu so far has the worst, if isolated, problem with PFAS in the drinking water itself. Whanganui in Auckland is waiting on tests to see how bad its problem is. Wherever the chemical crops up, uncertainty is sure to follow, even for Andy Russell, who set up the local committee to negotiate with officials.
We've got the Defence Force doing the testing and controlling the testing, and they're the ones who've done the polluting. Inadvertently, not maliciously, that does seem a bit odd and does stick in the core of locals around here a little bit.
Still?
Yes, I'm afraid it does. Look, they're nice people, they're doing a job, and it's not personal, at least it's not for me, but yeah, it's just the system hasn't worked that well, I don't think. We've got 1 more test to go, we've had 3, 1 more test to go. What happens after that?
Do you know what happens after that?
No, I wouldn't have a clue.
The Kinlochs say a community water scheme to tap into a deep bore of clean water far away looks likely and should solve most people's problems, but not theirs.
I think the hardest thing is you're just always dealing with a consultant.
We want to speak to people who are going to say, okay, we think this will happen, that will happen, so we can move on. You can't move on. You go through things in your sleep at night, and sleep's very difficult at the moment. So it's always there looking at you. The joy's been taken away. Yeah.
For Checkpoint, Phil Pennington.
27 minutes past 5. The government is proposing a range of changes aimed at making it easier for tenants to rent properties and to stay in them, but landlords are hoping they'll also be considered before any changes go ahead. The Housing Minister, Phil Twyford, this morning announced a series of proposed changes to the Residential Tenancies Act, which he says will finally make things easier for renters, but it goes out for public consultation shortly. The Minister says he's not targeting landlords and wants to get the balance right, and the Property Investors Association is hoping he'll consider their wish list too. What do they want? Here's our political reporter, Gia Garrick.
A third of all New Zealanders rent now, and Mr Twyford says landlords have been getting an easy ride under the law.
There's little doubt, I think, that our tenancy laws in New Zealand are out of date. They haven't kept up with changes in New Zealand society, and they leave so many renters with a level of kind of insecurity that takes a terrible toll on their lives.
Mr Twyford's proposing changes to ease pressure on renters. They include getting rid of no-cause tenancy terminations, limiting rent increases to once a year, and increasing the amount of notice a landlord must give tenants before terminating a tenancy from 42 to 90 days. And putting limitations on the practice of rent bidding, which is a recent battle renters have been facing. The Chief Executive of the New Zealand Property Investors Federation, Andrew King, says Mr Twyford should also consider changes to make providing a rental property easier, cheaper and less risky.
He has been listening, and I hope he's been listening to some of the concerns that we have, and also realised that, we're not against improving tenants' renting quality and things like that. We just don't want to see our rights and perhaps large costs which aren't going to provide lots of benefit for tenants being introduced.
Mr King's wish list includes making tenants responsible for damage they cause to a property, increasing the notice a tenant has to give to 6 weeks, as it currently is for landlords, and making it an illegal act for tenants to stop paying their rent as soon as they give that notice. Mr Twyford says he just wants to get the balance right. The Green Party has long campaigned on better rights for renters, and co-leader Marama Davidson joined the minister in the Wellington suburb of Roseneath for today's announcement.
We've got a little one on the way as well.
A little on the way. Congratulations.
Yeah, huge congratulations.
Yeah, so recently.
The announcement was made at Ryan's house. He had searched for 3 months before he found a place for him and his partner. He doesn't want his last name used in fear of limiting his chances to find a place to live in future.
It's been pretty tough, yeah. Like, it seems that a lot of people are outbidding each other. So places were listed for $530, people chucking $560, $600, just outbid people. So, but that's what people do when they're desperate.
Miss Davidson says she's extremely pleased to see what she called an archaic law getting a revamp to help those who can't afford to buy their own home.
Back in 1986, our laws, our communities were at the point where 26% of children lived in a rental property. Today, it's 43%. That's a massive change.
Miss Davidson shared her own experience of being evicted from a house with a rotten kitchen, no insulation and a broken garage door, right when she first became an MP. She began looking for a new home and says her six-figure salary was a game changer.
I tell you, I was in a privileged position. I went from being at the back of the line for a landlord's choice to only looking at one property and getting the first property. Previously, I looked at 50, applied for 30, had to beg for a property that no one else wanted. Big change. You shouldn't have to become an MP to be able to get a rental property.
Auckland Action Against Poverty's Ricardo Menendez, on the other hand, doesn't believe this reform goes far enough and says rent pricing as a whole must be addressed.
Without addressing the fundamental issues of properties being seen as homes rather than investments, renters are still going to get the short stick and landlords are going to continue being able to make a profit out of what should be a basic human right.
The government wants all changes confirmed and then in place by 2020. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gia Garrick.
You are with Checkpoint. A lot of feedback coming in on rating churches paying rates. Zach Fleming's story from earlier in the program, and overwhelmingly you're saying churches should. About time churches paid rates. This should extend to sanitarium too, who should pay taxes. Churchgoers can fund their religions, not the taxpayer. Surely churches could seek judicial review of this action taken by Auckland City Council regarding extortionate rates, or has this doctrine become obsolete? If St Matthews can afford to buy a $100,000 grand piano, they can afford to pay rates like the rest of it. While we're at it, it's high time they pay taxes. Well, religion isn't the same as charity. And this person says boo-hoo with an unsmiley face. Churches are already exempt from paying tax and now they still want free rates. Churches make a ton of money and should pay for everything like the common man does. Overwhelming support for churches paying rates in the text we are receiving on 2101. It's nice to hear from you. Thank you very much indeed. Madison is next with business news, but with the time at 27.5 minutes to 6. Here is Katrina with the headlines.
The Prime Minister says she had no influence over the decision to halt an inquiry into the leak of Simon Bridges' expenses. The Speaker, Trevor Mallard, pulled the investigation on Friday after details about an anonymous text message from a person claiming to be the leaker were made public. The National Party leader says the only reason Mr Mallard stopped the investigation was because Jacinda Ardern said it was an internal matter for National. But Ms Ardern said she said publicly weeks ago that it was an internal matter for the National Party. The Crown has told the High Court in Auckland 2 prison officers used excessive force on a prisoner and a third tried to cover it up. The prosecutor, David Wiseman, says more officers were called on after one of the guards was attacked by 3 prisoners. Mr Wiseman said one of the guards kicked a prisoner who was on the ground in the head 3 times and another broke his ankle and leg. The lawyers for the prison officers said they did not intend to harm the prisoner. In the United States, top figures from the professional online gaming community are shocked and dismayed after a shooting at a tournament in Florida left 3 people dead. The police have named the shooter as 24-year-old David Katz from Baltimore and say he was in Jacksonville for an electronic gaming competition but had lost his games. They say he shot dead 2 people at a bar that was live streaming the tournament before killing himself. About 500 gang members gathered in Whanganui today for the tangi of a murdered mongrel mob member. Kevin Ratana was shot dead outside his Castle Cliff home on Tuesday and the police are still searching for the offenders. A mongrel mob woman, Marsha, says it's the largest tangi she's ever seen and a testament to the love people felt for Mr Ratana. A massive opportunity to follow their dreams has been announced today for budding New Zealand astronauts and space scientists.
An agreement between the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment and NASA is allowing science students to apply for internships at the US Space Agency. Applications for the NASA scholarships will be open next month. That is the headlines. I'm off to do that.
Excellent. You're going to apply. We're going to have more on that coming up. It's a fascinating story. Thanks, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Madison Reedy. Hi, Madison. Welcome back. Network provider Chorus, sense of disappointment with their profit result. What's happened?
Yeah, so they posted a net profit after tax today for the financial year just ended of $85 million. Now that's down from 113 the previous financial year, so about a kind of drop of about 28 million there. And most of that's due to weaker revenue, so less sales coming from its fixed line copper network. That's one particular type of broadband. And it's a little bit slower, a little bit older, but it is still making up most of the revenue. So it's still about 55%, but less than usual. Now that's because most people are shifting off it onto the likes of fibre and VDSL, which are your faster types of network, your faster, more modern ones. And they've had, so in the past year, they've just installed 156,000 fibre network installations. So certainly a big increase in uptake there. So now 65% of their customers are on either a fibre or VDSL network, and it was only 45% last year.
And is there less money for them in that, is there?
There is. It's cheaper. It is.
Right, okay.
It certainly is. So obviously if they have more people on that, they will make less money from those sales too. But certainly still a lot of money to be made in broadband. And as I mentioned, they expect that uptake to increase. And they're actually in talks with Spark, which we've talked about before as well, for the delivery of the Rugby World Cup. And streaming content is just surging in New Zealand. So they put out some figures on that today
because they can't have that Australian situation, right, where people are paying for it and not getting it.
Exactly.
Woo! Z Energy buying most of an electricity provider?
Yeah, so Z Energy is our largest fuel company. So typically petrol at the pump, but they've now made a play into electricity. So this is kind of the first merger of this that we've seen. So they're buying 70% of Flick Electric. They're paying 46. Flick.
Right.
Do you know what Flick is?
Yeah.
Let me explain.
When I hear Flick, I just think of that.
It's a Wellington startup.
I'm a little fire engine. I'm called a little Flick from the Children's Requests when I was little. That's
you
not what
continue.
we're talking about. Yeah, no, thanks, Madison.
No, Flick Electric is a Wellington startup,
right.
So it's certainly not too old. And Z is paying $46 million, so certainly not too startup-y anymore, is it? So they're paying $46 million for that. It's going to be funded by debt, and that values Flick at about $70 million there. They're going to pay it in 2 instalments as well. So the first one of about almost $16 million, the second one of about $30.5 million. And Flick, if you don't know too much about it, it's not the children's rhyme, but they sell electricity at wholesale prices. So it's all about spot pricing, and they were one of the first to do this. Well, in fact, the first to do this in New Zealand. So it means that you save when, say, there's a lot of water in the hydro kind of creation of energy there. You save money when the prices are low, but if there is low hydro in those energy making plants, then you can kind of get caught out by high prices.
And we've done stories here. Well, I'm remembering this. We've done stories on people who were caught out. Nonetheless, it's been a hell of a successful startup if that's what it's selling for.
Absolutely, exactly. And there was actually a little bit of contention there in that deal, though. 2 of Zed's directors, this was kind of snuck into that announcement today, Mark Cross and Steve Rainler. They were actually conflicted over the deal. So the whole oversight of this transaction and deal was actually overseen by a separate committee. The rest of Z Energy's board members kind of sat on the side and went through that deal without them, and whether or not those 2 directors will actually stick around is still up in the air.
Right. What happened on the markets? I haven't caught anything.
We actually had a bit of a surge there too. So the NZX Top 50 index closed up 0.5%. So that's about 47 points to close over 9,000, still at 9,206. Points there. And among the big movers was SLI Systems. So its share price rose about 22%, which is a decent amount. Z Energy, we just mentioned, their share price actually fell 1.5% on that news to $7.29. Chorus, we mentioned as well, their share price was flat, unchanged at $4.41. The New Zealand dollar's buying at 66.9 US cents. We're finally getting some traction there again. 91.3 Australian and 52 British pence.
Madison Reedy, thank you very much indeed. It is 21 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. We head now to Maraho in the Tasman region, roughly an hour's drive west of Nelson, give or take a bit. You may remember we went there after ex-tropical cyclone Gita had passed through in February. The heavy rain brought down an avalanche of forestry debris, damaging some homes and covering land with mud and logs and felling waste. It was a tough period for the region. Cyclone Fahi also hit the area, causing flooding and road closures closing slips and massive storm surges in Nelson, badly damaging buildings the length of the coastline. I'm sure people there remember it very, very well. That was summer. With spring almost upon us, how's the clean-up going? And in some places, is it going at all? Our Nelson Marlborough reporter, Tracy Neal, went to find out.
Tons of rocks are being shaped into a new barrier beside the river at the Maraho Valley Farm community. For resident Merv Hall, it's a positive step. He knows they're lucky. There are other places in Rewaka and the Motueka Valley where the clean-up has only just started.
I think it's been a matter of the fact that there's many voices here and that we probably had a lot to say and that they reacted first here. We're a community of quite a few people. We had the ability to mobilise.
Gita struck only weeks after Fahey rolled over Nelson in February. The 122-year-old building, the Boathouse, was among many coastal properties damaged by the storm surge. Manager Amy Jo Trey says insurance is covering some of the cost of the staged reconstruction.
Stage 1 is getting open, so that is making the building safe, functional and accessible to the public and the members, and the cafe open, making money again.
They're fundraising to cover the rest of the costs as they eye up a grand reopening in October, which Kiwi folk rock band the Waratahs just confirmed as the main act. The two storms caused almost $94 million in insured losses across the top of the South Island and West Coast. Gita alone caused more than $500,000 worth of damage to the Maraho community farm, the worst in its 46 years. Merv Hall says Tasman Forest Management, which oversees the Maraho plantations, along with the owners, have made significant contributions to the clean-up. But the community's 11 shareholders each face large bills for repair costs on the leasehold land.
Because it's all common land, we can't raise a mortgage. Our money goes into one body corporate, one fund, and then the money's paid out. And I think our cost is probably $60,000, $70,000 so far.
About 15 kilometres away in Rewaka, fruit and vegetable grower Frank Hickmott is still picking through the mess. He didn't have insurance to cover the cost of fixing broken fences and the loss of a third of his bean crop. Mr Hickmott says the help he got was closer to home.
People rallied around, other people that we know locally, churches and that, they came and helped clean up the garage and things like that. So I didn't feel stressed about it because it just, you didn't feel like you were on your own.
The Tasman District Council has spent close to $10 million fixing infrastructure like roads and culverts. Its post-Gita recovery manager, Richard Kirby, says there's a high expectation of councils when such events occur, but there are limits.
One of the challenges we do have is we do have public funds, ratepayer funds, and one of the challenges we've got is to make sure those funds are spent for the public good rather than the private benefit.
Mr Kirby says the biggest challenge has been the impact on people. Tolaga Bay suffered a similar fate in June, and Merv Hall says his Maraho community has some advice for locals.
Get together as a group. Don't stand alone. When people get together, you can share the pain, the load, the work, and get action and things happening much faster.
The Transport Agency says the next stage of the Takaka Hill Recovery and Rebuild program has been split into 2 work packages over the next 2 spring-summer seasons, meaning that the road to Golden Bay won't be fully fixed until 2020. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
Hearing about the tangi of Kevin Ratana, who was, of course, shot in Whanganui last week. We've just received a statement from Detective Inspector Ross Mackay. A number of people are in police custody in Whanganui this evening as investigations continue into last week's fatal shooting. The Armed Defenders Squad and the Police Eagle helicopter assisted investigative staff in executing multiple search warrants in the area today. Those in custody as a result of the warrants are helping police with ongoing inquiries. Some are expected to be released on bail and some held in custody as potential charges are confirmed. Police also today recovered a number of firearms, firearm parts and ammunition. The Whanganui community can expect to continue to see an increased number of armed police, investigative staff and the Eagle helicopter in the area as we work on the investigation. So people in custody, it sounds like some serious charges may be laid. That just in from Detective Inspector Ross Mackay. It's coming up to 5:45. Is this a drug story or a poverty story or a social services story or possibly all of the above? Yes, we head now to Maraenui, Napier's poorest suburb. RNZ's Hawke's Bay reporter Anusha Bradley began work on a story about the availability and use of synthetics in the community. At least 5 shops in Maraenui sell the drug, which has taken hold of the community of 3,000 people. Police are trying to stamp down on it, but even if they can control supply, they can't stop the demand. And that makes this a story about why some communities use drugs like this so much more than others and feel the toll of them so much harder. Here is Anusha Bradley.
Hoki Ward grew up in Maraenui wanting to be a mobster. He probably would have ended up being one if it weren't for a chance meeting with a Māori policeman when he was about 10. He's now a community constable and his sole mission is to stamp out synthetics in his old hood.
I think it's an epidemic, to be honest.
Driving around in his patrol car, Hoki explains how synthetics have taken over the community.
Around here, everyone's using it. It's like drinking or cigarettes. And so you're looking at all sorts of ages groups as well, right up to the koros, the nannies, who are supposed to be the ones that will be the wise ones that are supposed to look after your family unit, to your parents, to the young parents, to the kids.
This is personal for Hoki. His cousin's death is linked to the drug.
She was a heavy synthetic user and she passed away basically because of the synthetics that she was using heightens her own health issues. So she had a few health issues with her heart and bits and pieces, and that's just tenfolded it. I've also got family members that are addicted to synthetics currently. So I think this is where I suppose I get quite passionate about it because of that. I'm not only just doing it because it's affecting my community and my job, but I'm also getting affected by it personally.
Hoki Ward says many locals got hooked on synthetics when it was legal in the early 2000s. When it was banned in 2014, they just made their own. Consumption has increased sharply in the last couple of years as rising unemployment, poverty and the loss of nearly 100 state homes left many in a desperate way. One user we've agreed to call Leilani is struggling to give up the drug, even though it's cost her 2 children.
One of the reasons why I turn to synthetics is it makes me feel better because every time I look at my kids, I can't put a bread and butter on the table for them.
The police say all synthetics in Hawke's Bay are coming from Maraenui, and the mongrel mob, which forms a major part of this community, has a hand in its trade by taking a cut of the sales. The gang won't comment publicly on the claim, but sources close to the mob deny they're involved. There are several synthetic shops in the suburb, and locals say some of them have been operating for years. Residents don't understand why the police don't just shut them down. The head of Hawke's Bay CIB, Detective Senior Sergeant Brent Greville, says even if they do shut them down, another just pops up, and he says it's often difficult to close them in the first place.
And for instance, I'm aware of one particular address that we've been back there at least 4 times in the last couple of years on different occasions trying to close them down and have been sometimes successful in locating product. But with any search warrant that we do, it's sometimes timing is a big thing, and we sometimes get results and sometimes we don't.
The police have made 41 seizures of synthetic cannabis from Maraenui over the last 18 months, but all small amounts. Brent Greville says methamphetamine is a much bigger problem for the police in Hawke's Bay as a whole, but he says the police are doing what they can to tackle synthetics in Maraenui.
We're never going to be able to arrest our way out of these situations for the community's sake. You know, there's a number of options that we can take, and one of them is just enforcement. We're just one, I guess, way of trying to help this problem, because without the customer base here, this problem wouldn't exist. So I guess it's up the community not acceptance of it would hopefully decrease that that customer base in time.
But demand for synthetics in Maraenui is huge. Hawkeye Ward says that's because it's cheap and easy to make, and the punishment if you're caught is small.
You're better to sell synthetics than cannabis because you're not going to get anywhere near the penalty as you would if you were to sell cannabis.
A bill before Parliament is seeking to increase the maximum imprisonment for making and selling synthetics from 2 to 8 years, even though the government says the police advise that harsher penalties won't work. Hawkeye Ward says the Whanganui community also needs to step up.
They talk about us doing our job, do your job, all that sort of stuff. For us to do our job, the community needs to get involved because at the end of the day, it's the community that's killing the community.
The coroner is investigating at least 3 deaths in Whanganui linked to synthetics, including the death of a 55-year-old man 2 weeks ago. 3 men charged with possession and supply of synthetic material following a raid on 4 properties a few days before his death will appear in Napier District Court this week. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
It's the community that's killing the community. That's a very strong line from the local police officer. You can read RNZ's full investigation on synthetics in Whanganui on our website. You can tune into Morning Report tomorrow morning to learn what help is available for people hooked on the drug who are desperate to get off it. Anusha Bradley, the reporter there, of course. Luke McPake, the cameraman in Anusha's story. Let's go to Australia, where popular support for the coalition government has crashed to its lowest level in a decade after leadership ructions in the Liberal Party. They weren't ructions, were they? It was a coup. Scott Morrison replaced Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister on Friday. A new Australian news poll survey puts the two-party vote at 56% for Labor, well ahead of the coalition's 44%. It also shows opposition Labor leader Bill Shorten, who had long trailed Mr Turnbull, who got rolled, of course, is now the nation's preferred Prime Minister. At the same time, Mr Morrison, the new Prime Minister, is attempting to repair political bridges within his party. But the man who was a thorn in Malcolm Turnbull's side, Tony Abbott, bless him, could spark yet more trouble. Here's the ABC's Tom Eagleton.
With Malcolm Turnbull gone from politics, it's game over, says Tony Abbott.
The era of the political assassin is over, and thank God for that.
The former Prime Minister was one of the lead instigators of the instability that led to last week's political chaos, but he now says calm will prevail.
We've had far too much backstabbing, we've had far too much leaking and briefing, and I think we can now put all of that behind us.
But the new era begins with just the hint of tension between Mr Abbott and the new Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. Mr Morrison's offered him a minor promotion as envoy for Indigenous communities, but for now, Mr Abbott's refusing to take up the post. He spoke with presenter Ray Hadley on Sydney Radio 2GB.
There are lots of things that need to happen, and whether an additional authority figure or someone with an additional title can help, that's something that I want to discuss further with the Prime Minister and maybe chat to people like Noel Pearson.
Mr Abbott's allies have been calling for him to be returned to Cabinet ever since he was deposed as Prime Minister.
I still think I have a lot of public life left in me right now.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that.
I'm determined to make the most of it.
Finance Minister Matthias Cormann also says the offer is genuine.
The Prime Minister recognises that Tony Abbott has a strong contribution to make as a former Prime Minister in particular.
The Deputy Liberal leader Josh Frydenberg is also urging Mr Abbott to accept Mr Morrison's offer.
No one denies the fact that the former Prime Minister has particular skills, and those skills need to be brought to bear to help us get re-elected the next election.
And that's looking like a much harder job after the removal of Mr Turnbull as Prime Minister. A news poll out today shows a 4-point crash in the coalition's primary vote.
I see it as a positive because this previous news poll is at the feet of the former Prime Minister, not at the feet of the current Prime Minister.
Yeah, it's all up from here, I think.
Senator Cormann's more sanguine about the poll result.
We had a very difficult week last week, so in that context, obviously, the result today is not surprising, but the issues that emerged last week had to be resolved. They have been resolved. We are now back to work.
That report from the ABC. Gosh, I read out texts and feedback before about churches paying rates. Zach Fleming's story, and it was overwhelmingly people supporting churches paying rates. Well, since then, the church-going community has responded in equal numbers. This is an email from Erica, which is pretty representative of what people are now saying in response to the earlier feedback. John, I find some of the messages you have received about churches paying rates rude and ill-informed. Most, not all churches are asset-rich and cash-poor. Churches are not the buildings, but the people who attend them. We're the people who volunteer, run and supply food banks, who run community programs for those who need a hand up. We're the ones who are first there to offer love and help in so many situations. If we have to find the extra money to pay rates, we won't be able to offer those social services. That work and expense will have to become the taxpayers, or many more people will fall through the cracks than already do. Maybe the person who thinks boo-hoo, and that's what one of the texters said, will think again. I would suggest the vast majority of the non-churchgoers in Aotearoa, New Zealand, have no idea of just how often church members roll their sleeves up to do the hard yards in their communities, says Erica by email, and a texter says, how uncaring New Zealanders have become to gleefully expect churches to pay rates when most church funds are donations and churches and church members support so much charitable work in the community. Many churches may be forced to close under those circumstances, and where there do people gather to worship and offer succour to their community? New Zealand is simply not New Zealand anymore. Very sad. So the pendulum has gone from one side to the other on that feedback. All feedback welcome. It's wonderful to hear from you. 2101, the text number, or checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, the email address. It's 5 minutes to 6. Calling all wannabe astronauts, satellite developers and space scientists, high-achieving tertiary science students, which certainly would have eliminated me, are now eligible for NASA's international internships under a new agreement between the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment and the US Space Agency. The government says that will give New Zealand future innovators and scientists opportunities to kickstart space-related careers. Anne-Marie May was at the launch at Wellington's Carter Observatory, and she filed this report.
The government hopes giving young Kiwis the opportunity to take up NASA internships with the help of a new scholarship from the New Zealand Space Agency will build on our scientific successes. Economic Development Minister David Parker points to great New Zealand scientists like Sir William Pickering.
He went to be director of NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratories in Pasadena for 22 years, and he was one of the people who led the successful effort to place the first US satellite Explorer 1 into the Earth orbit, and many other successes which led the Americans to be leaders in the space race.
The United States Ambassador Scott Brown says it makes total sense to extend the internship program to New Zealanders.
Always kind of stepping outside their comfort zone, working outside the box and trying to do things better. I mean, gosh, who would have thought that you actually have bikes in a sailboat? I mean, that's a great example right there with America's Cup.
Dr Delwyn Moller, the Research Director of the Centre for Space Science Technology in Central Otago, was also at today's launch. She once worked for NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab and says the scholarships will make getting there much smoother than it was for her.
It really gives a pathway for students. Rather than kind of this random walk that I did that just happened to get me to where I went, now there's an actual pathway. And if they set their aspirations that way, they've got a way through that's tangible and that they can follow a process.
Matthew Furkett, who helps run the undergraduate rocket club at Canterbury University, is already involved in sending rockets into space and plans to apply for a NASA scholarship.
It gives us the opportunity to go overseas to meet NASA people and gain expertise from them and then bring that back to New Zealand and really grow the space sector here in New Zealand.
Fellow UC student Jack Davies says by the end of their degrees he and Mr Furkett hope something they've made and designed will have reached the edge of space, and he wants to continue getting better at that.
I'd like to be the one designing the rockets and building the rockets, making them the best they can be. This opportunity at NASA is amazing for that, being able to go and see what they're doing over there. Obviously they're experts at it, they've been doing it for so long now.
The government will provide $25,000 to meet airfares and living costs for those who win a NASA scholarship, and David Parker says the technology they will help develop here will have uses worldwide.
It will make mobile communications more accessible to people in geographically spread areas where it's expensive to roll out fibre. It'll enable us to improve land use and water quality over the years. So this is really good that the Americans are recognising New Zealand's leadership in this.
Applications for the NASA scholarships will open next month, and it is hoped the first students will be there in June next year. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
It's about a minute and a half before 6 o'clock. The feedback is flooding in now on churches and whether or not they should pay rates. It started with 100% of people saying that they should pay rates. Then the pendulum swung back to people from churches saying, no, we do good work and we haven't got any cash and we can't afford to pay rates. And if we have to pay them, the churches will close. Now it's about 50-50. This person says, so John, Auckland Council is going to tax Salvation Army. That's just stupid and short-sighted. Actually, we'll make inquiries about that. That's a good question. And this person says, oh, the awful ignorance and prejudice shown towards anything concerning religion. When did you last hear anything positive said about Christians on TV and radio? That's Peter. We had Phil Pennington's story about water and the firefighting foam contaminating it earlier in the program. We've heard from Ken, who's texted in, hi, John. We have a well on our property that we had tested unfit to drink because of nitrates and E. coli. Our other option is Bull's water. Yeah, that does sound like a bit of a lose-lose, Ken. We might give you a call about that. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you all for your feedback on Checkpoint 2101. It's the text number. You know it. And the email address is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. It's coming up to 6 o'clock. Katrina is here, but let's listen first of all to the pips.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. Extra police as well as their Eagle helicopter have been patrolling Whanganui today to prevent gang violence during the tangi of mongrel mob member Kevin Ratana, who was shot dead at his home last Tuesday. About 500 gang members have gathered in Whanganui for the tangi. Inspector Mark Harrison says police have executed search warrants at a number of properties in relation to Mr Ratana's death and have made an unspecified number of arrests. He says the police will remain vigilant while there are so many gang members in the area.
The nature of gang versus gang events is something that unfortunately the police have dealt with a number of times, and that's why we have increased our numbers in Whanganui to make sure that if anything did happen, we've both got the ability to respond, but also the sufficient numbers to ensure the safety of our people as well.
Mark Harrison says the public in Whanganui should not be concerned by the heavy gang presence. Lawyers for the prison guards accused of an attack on a prisoner say they did not intend to harm him. Desmond Whaafoi is charged with injuring a prisoner and Wiremu Paikia of causing grievous bodily harm. A third officer, Viju Devasi, is charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice. At the High Court in Auckland, Mr Whaafoi's lawyer said his client was hit repeatedly in the head and that affected his judgment. Mr Paikia's lawyer said his client was wrestling with the prisoner's legs and did the best he could in a difficult situation. Mr Devasi's lawyer, Paul Borich, said his client had been attacked by prisoners the year before. He read part of his client's interview with the police, which showed he was having flashbacks. The Prime Minister has flatly rejected accusations she had any influence over the Speaker's decision to halt an inquiry into the leak of the National Party leader Simon Bridges' expenses. The Speaker, Trevor Mallard, pulled the plug on the investigation after details about an anonymous text message from a person claiming to be the leaker and a National Party MP were made public. Mr Bridges says there was no reason for Mr Mallard to do that, aside from the Prime Minister saying that day it was an internal matter for National. But Jacinda Ardern says she's been saying the same thing for weeks, and the matter has nothing to do with her government. The Health Minister says a new dental training facility and treatment clinic in South Auckland could see almost 19,000 patients a year. The University of Otago will build the clinic on land owned by the county's Manukau District Health Board at its Manukau Super Clinic. As well as providing training for students, members of the public will be able to get treatment under supervision, with appointments costing about $40. David Clark says cost is a big reason why adults don't go to the dentist.
We know that a lot of people currently don't attend at all because of cost, and the more we can bring that barrier down, the better. Of course, DHBs provide services for those who are at the hardest end of the spectrum as a part of inpatient service, but this will mean there'll be more access to care for more people.
David Clark hopes the clinic will go some way to addressing the needs of the community. The clinic is expected to open in 2020. Hospitals are imploring the public to use only the emergency department if they're seriously ill, with record numbers in the last week. The Waitemata District Health Board in Auckland says 2,600 people have turned up to the emergency departments at Waitakere and North Shore hospitals in the last week, 150 more than the same time last year. The DHB's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Andrew Brandt, says hospitals haven't expected the sharp rise of patients, and he believes the flu season has arrived later than forecast.
It's just really hit us in the last week or two. It's hit all the Auckland area and really Waitemata in particular in the last week, for example. Why exactly the timing is as it is from the influenza, that's difficult to tell, but we do know that it is now upon us.
Dr. Andrew Brandt from the Waitemata District Health Board. 4 people have been killed and 143 injured after torrential rain hit Taiwan. Thousands of homes were flooded and 7,000 people have been evacuated in central and southern parts of the island. The flooding has also caused power outages and road damage, and the authorities estimate agricultural losses of more than $30 million. The Army has mobilised more than 37,000 troops, while forecasters warn of another 3 days of torrential rain and strong winds. It's 6:05. Sport. World number 1 Rafael Nadal and American Serena Williams headlined the opening day of competition at the US Tennis Open in New York tonight. Nadal will defend the men's title, while Williams is chasing her 7th US Open title. Nadal, a 3-time winner, plays Spanish compatriot and friend David Ferrer in his opening match.
Of course, have been a very important title. I always had a great connection with the crowd here, the court. Yeah, bring me to another level of energy, and that's something that I enjoy.
Also in action on the first day are Juan Martín del Potro, Andy Murray, Sloane Stephens and Venus and Serena Williams. The Europe-based professional cyclist George Bennett will lead the New Zealand men's team for next month's World Road Cycling Champs in Austria. Sam Bewley, Patrick Bevan and Dion Smith have all competed in Grand Tours this year will join Bennett. Hamish Bond and Bevan will ride the individual time trial. Georgia Williams, Grace Anderson and Michaela Harvey will ride the women's road race, and Harvey will also compete in the time trial. The Silver Ferns captain Katrina Grant has re-signed with the Central Pulse for a 10th season. The Pulse have made the finals of the ANZ Premiership competition for the past 2 years but failed to win the title. And the former Wallabies prop Ben Alexander has retired from professional rugby. His last test was in 2014 against England, and his last Super Rugby game was for the Brumbies last month. That's the news.
Kia ora, g'day. Paul Brennan on Nights this week from 7 on RNZ National. We talk to Miriam Jacobi, the director of an insightful new documentary on eating disorders. Our overseas correspondent Shobha Nayan joins us from Bangalore in India. And on Our Changing World, William Ray discovers that urban bats are living in central Hamilton. And he's off to find out where they hang out and how people are helping them out.
I'm joined by Lisa Paris. Busy for the next week.
Holy moly, yes.
Going Global Music Summit. I've been to several showcases in my lifetime. Some of them, I have to say, turn out to be an absolute disaster for the band because they are nervous or, something happens and it's like, this is our big moment and uh-oh. That's Lately with Karen Hay, 10 p.m. weeknights on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Mainly fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with isolated showers developing. Waikatutu Manawatu, including the central high country, mainly fine apart from areas of low cloud or fog tomorrow morning. Isolated evening showers about the central high country. Gisborne to Wairarapa fine. Horowhenua to Wellington, Nelson, Marlborough and Buller, mainly fine, isolated showers tomorrow about the Tararua Range and Marlborough Sounds. Westland cloudy, patchy rain, clearing tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago excluding Clutha, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with a few showers. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, rain about Fiordland with some heavy falls and snow to 500 metres, spreading east overnight, clearing tomorrow morning apart from a few showers remaining about Fiordland. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks so much, Katrina. Just repeating a small amount of the information that we received from Whanganui Police Detective Inspector Ross Mackay at about 6:15. A number of people are in police custody in Whanganui this evening as investigations continue into last week's fatal shooting. The Armed Defender Squad and the Police Eagle helicopter assisted investigative staff in executing multiple search warrants in the area. Some serious charges are expected to be laid. Well, this is all in response to the shooting last week. Hundreds of gang members have farewelled mongrel mob member Kevin Ratana, who was shot and killed in Whanganui. The 27-year-old's tangi was held at Parikino Marae on the Whanganui River, the road, this morning, before the father of two was laid to rest, embraced in a sea of red. Our excellent Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has been there.
You heard the funeral cortege long before you saw it. About a half a dozen Harley-Davidson motorcycles heralded Kevin, aka Castro's, arrival at Pungarehu, a quiet marae nestled on the picturesque banks of the Whanganui River. Then came a stream of vehicles as far as the eye could see, and the gang members. Mongrel mob members from chapters around the country and even the Cook Islands, but also King Cobras and Australia's notorious Rebels MC. The mood wasn't dark or angry. This was a celebration and a show of solidarity. Marsha had come across from the Bay of Plenty.
It's got to be the biggest funeral I've ever seen in my whole life, and I'm 40. I've witnessed a lot of unification with the other chapters, other gangs, and it's that in itself is a big thing for New Zealand gangs.
Marsha says the turnout was influenced by how Kevin Ratana died.
I think it's the love for, the love for Castro, or Kevin, the sadness of the repercussions of, this is what happens, and just the whole sadness of it all, but I can't say anything more than the fact that he's so young.
Marsha had come over to speak to Patrine Wickham, who lives near the Pungarehu Marae. Mrs Wickham's family has long ties to the Ratanas. She wasn't worried about the big gang presence. So what's the atmosphere been around like here today?
Oh, no different than normal. no different than normal. Just have seen some very nice cars and bikes going up the road.
You guys obviously don't feel intimidated?
Oh, not at all. No, not at all. No, in all fairness, we do get treated with utmost respect from most of the young people round about.
Mrs Wickham says the police have kept a low profile. Have you seen much of a police presence?
None. So if there are any police around, they must be in plain cars. But I don't, as far as I know, and nobody's called in here. Yeah. So we haven't seen any police presence.
Yeah, and you're not worried about that?
No, not at all.
While the police presence on the Whanganui River Road has been low-key today, they were busy in the city. Inspector Mark Harrison says warrants have been executed at a number of properties in relation to the shooting, and an unspecified number of arrests have been made. He says now the tangi is over, police are being extra vigilant with so many gang members in the area.
The nature of gang versus gang events is something that unfortunately the police have dealt with a number of times, and that's why we have increased our numbers in Whanganui to make sure that if anything did happen, we've both got the ability to respond, but also the sufficient numbers to ensure the safety of our people as well, which is just as important.
Inspector Harrison wanted to ensure the public there was little cause for concern. But despite the love expressed at the tangi, Marsha couldn't say forgiveness was on everybody's mind.
Such a sad thing, and it's just brought everyone together, and with the ultimate love. I mean, you can't
Is that the kind of thing that was spoken about at the eulogy, I guess?
Yeah, it was strongly spoken of. Love for each other, especially, you know, when you experience something like this, just to love, you know.
And just forgiveness?
I can't delve on that. I'm not a man, you know. It's not a woman to say.
Yeah.
Not for a woman to say.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The police say they will continue to have an increased presence in Whanganui over the next couple of days, and their Eagle helicopter will remain in the city tomorrow. I Whanganui mo te hōtaka o te ahi pō nei, ko Robin Martinaho.
Robin, part of RNZ's regional team, reporters based in the regions. We heard from Tracy Neal, based in Nelson Marlborough, earlier in the programme. It's 14 minutes past 6. 3 Paremoremo guards who normally look after the prisoners were themselves in the dock today for the start of a trial at the High Court in Auckland. One is accused of kicking a prisoner repeatedly in the head, another is charged with breaking the prisoner's ankle, and a third is accused of moving a camera to try and ruin any investigation. Desmond Fa'afoe has denied a charge of injuring with intent. His colleague, Wiremu Paikia, denies causing grievous bodily harm when he broke the prisoner's ankle, and Viju Duvase denies attempting to pervert the course of justice. Our Auckland court reporter, Edward Gay, filed this report.
The Crown Prosecutor, David Wiseman, said the attack happened as prisoners were returning from the recreation room. The prisoners were being patted down when prisoner Trent Wellington attacked prison officer Desmond Fa'afoe. Prisoner Mitai Angel and Samuel Jr. Hutchins joined in.
Mr. Fa'afoe fell to the ground. Angel and Hutchins then stood over him and struck his head numerous times with shanks, which are improvised weapons made by prisoners, usually featuring a blade.
They repeatedly stabbed Mr. Fa'afoe about the head and neck. Backup arrived and the prisoners were restrained.
Now, once prisoner Angel had been taken to the ground, he was lying curled up on his side, surrounded by various corrections officers.
But Mr. Wiseman said despite Angel being restrained, the corrections officers used excessive force.
It is at this point the Crown alleges that the defendant, Mr. Fa'afoe, kicked prisoner Angel in the head 3 times.
Mr. Wiseman said corrections officer Viju Devasi was part of the group of officers who responded. He said Mr. Devasi's body camera captured part of the attack.
Crown says that the footage shows the defendant, Mr. Devasi, wearing blue gloves, trying to restrain Mr. Fa'afoe's leg in an attempt to stop him kicking Mr. Angel.
The recording also captured a voice.
Now you'll be able to hear on the footage the words Des, enough, 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 in response to the kicks, as well as the phrase camera, camera.
The footage also shows corrections officer Wiremu Paikia crouching over Angel's legs.
The defendant, Mr. Paikia, was applying excessive force to prisoner Angel's legs and ankle. By the time that Mr. Paikia leaves that position and another corrections officer takes over, see the prisoner Angel's ankle is bent at a right angle sideways.
Mr. Wiseman said Angel was left with a compound fracture to his ankle and leg. Corrections officer Viju Devasi had been one of the officers responding to the attack.
About a half minute later, Mr. Devasi goes up the stairs into the command room of Bravo Block, and the Crown says interferes with the camera that is recording the incident involving prisoner Angel.
Mr. Wiseman said Mr. Devasi pointed the camera towards a bit of clothing on the floor and away from the prisoners. He acknowledged the jurors may feel sympathy towards Mr. Fa'afoe, saying he worked in a very difficult and at times scary environment, but he urged them to put any feelings of sympathy to one side. Mr. Fa'afoe's lawyer, Todd Simmons, said his client never intended to injure Angel.
Multiple blows to his head, stab wounds, cuts, abrasions, bleeding, and the effect that that had on him, the defence say, and his ability to think straight, to appreciate what he was doing at that point in time. That's the defence. He may have lashed out. You'll see that on the footage. But did he have that specific intent?
Mr. Paikia's lawyer, Aaron Perkins QC, said his client was wrestling with Angel's legs.
In a nutshell, Paikia, my client, was simply doing his job
very difficult circumstances to the best of his ability.
Mr Devasi's lawyer, Paul Borich QC, said his client had been attacked by prisoners the year before. He said the attack left an impression on his client, and he read extracts from his client's interview with the police.
It's all panic and rush at that time. To be honest with me, from what I'm saying right now, it's like, for me, just seeing Des, that was enough. Because it sort of bring back whole heaps of flashbacks for me, like I was just seeing myself.
He said his client moved the camera to check to see if there were other prisoners around. It was not to pervert the course of justice. The trial before Justice Gordon and a jury has been set down for 3 weeks. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gay ahau.
19 minutes past 6. Australia's new Prime Minister is having his first Monday in the job, and given what the latest poll has said about the likelihood of the Liberals being re-elected, there may not be that many of them. In short, did Peter Dutton and his coup make things worse rather than better for the party, which must now be feeling somewhat nostalgic about Malcolm Turnbull? Gareth Hutchins is a political correspondent for The Guardian in Australia, and I asked him if Scott Morrison will make the Liberals more palatable, more electable.
No, not at all. I don't know if you've seen the news poll that came out today.
Yep.
Where they have absolutely tanked. And we've still got people like Tony Abbott and some of his favourite radio shock jocks saying, well, this is a good thing because the only direction from here is up. But it's not what Australians want. We're all sick of it. Everything is pointing in the direction of them getting smashed at the election.
And that's with Bill Shorten as leader of the Labour Party, and implicitly that's rude of me. But Shorten is not a strikingly attractive candidate, is he?
No, he's not a very likeable figure in the eyes of voters. He hasn't been preferred PM for a number of polls, like more than 30, more than 40. He is preferred PM now, however, because people are just sick of it. Now, in Australia, a lot of people see him as a former union guy. So if you're not a fan of unions, you might be a bit suspicious there. I don't know, he's really hard to take when he comes across a TV screen. But behind closed doors, he's really personable, and he does have a lot of support inside the Labour Party. So, see how he goes.
And so the Liberals look, They look, well, Dutton looked opportunistic, and not, if you're going to be opportunistic in politics, you've got to win, right? So that was a disaster on every level. They look divided. They still have Abbott there, who is just doing immense damage. And it struck me that Morrison could have and perhaps should have taken more risks with his cabinet.
Well, he's facing the same problems as Turnbull faced, in that the party itself is bitterly divided between the Conservatives and the moderates. Morrison himself has shifted from the moderates more towards the Conservatives. He may have an opportunity and the ability to bridge the gap, but we're already hearing noises from Abbott and a couple of the other Conservatives that this new ministry isn't good enough. Abbott isn't happy with the role he's been offered. The problems haven't gone away.
Gareth, I'm asking you to read his mind effectively, and I don't think that's possible. But what is Abbott's end game? What does a win look like for him? What's he playing at?
Oh, God. Okay, well, I would not want to put words in his mouth, but this is just from my own observations. I think he would be very happy to see... Well, he'd want to see the coalition win at the election, right? But if the coalition lost, then perhaps he could take the leadership back, and then he could start to remould the Liberal Party in his own image. He has this constant battle with climate science and the attempt by various countries to put a price on carbon and to shift our energy systems into the future. He for some reason, he just does not buy it. He doesn't like it. He will do everything he can to stop it. So if he can get in charge of the Liberal Party and keep their culture running along Conservative lines rather than moderate lines, he'd be very happy with that.
Which, if it's true, if that's his long game, if that's really what he's thinking, is extraordinarily cynical.
Well, yeah, he's a hard one to figure out. I don't understand how you can call yourself a conservative and yet be kicking and screaming when it comes to trying to repurpose a country's energy system so that it can deal with changes in climate. You would think that would be a conservative position. You would also think that a conservative position would be looking after the environment proper, because without an environment you don't have an economy. But that's why I'm constantly baffled by some of the positions he comes up with.
Gareth Hutchins, who's a political correspondent for The Guardian in Australia, was talking about Tony Abbott at the end there. Yes, he is vaguely defying understanding at the moment, isn't he? We return now to our story from earlier in the program about the rates bill for Auckland's churches. Churches in New Zealand are rates exempt by law. Any building used primarily for religious purposes is, but an Auckland Council review of rates exempt properties has resulted in some churches being slapped with rates rises of up to 7,000%. In one case, from $400 to $28,000 per annum. $400 to $28,000. So now the political arm of the council has asked the operational arm of the council for a please explain, and told churches that they don't have to pay the first instalment of their new bill due on Friday until the mayor and councillors debate the change. You are debating the change in your texts, by golly, fiercely for and against. Zach Fleming spoke to Auckland Council's head of rates, Debbie Acott, and asked her how the new rates are being calculated.
So in the first instance, we sent out like a questionnaire, and the churches were to come back to us and let us know what portions of the property were used for what purpose, and if there were any discrepancies that we couldn't identify from that desktop exercise, one of our valuers went out to go and check what portions were used for what purpose.
Okay. And did a valuer visit most of these properties?
I actually don't know how many they physically visited, but I could find out.
On one of the documents that you sent out churches with those letters, it says here that areas with other uses should be fully rated, where there is a mix of rateable and non-rateable use. Ancillary areas, for example, storerooms, will be assessed in the way their use relates to the rateable and non-rateable land. So are we nitpicking right down to like the storeroom closet in terms of whether the council can rate the land that churches use or not rate it? Is that how nitpicky we're being?
Well, it just has to be apportioned off correctly, so we'll send somebody out to look or ask for the information and we'll rate accordingly.
For some churches, obviously, they have seen an increase in their rates because very small pockets of their land have been identified as not being principally used for religious activities, right? And so if we can talk about St Matthew's now, St Matthew's their rates have increased because of their offices, and that's solely their offices, is that correct?
I think so. I think it was solely their offices.
St Matthew's would argue that their offices are used for the running of the church. So they do administration, hold meetings, and all of that facilitates the running of the church. So technically it is used for religious purposes, but now it's being deemed to be rateable.
So we've had legal advice on what constitutes the rateable and non-rateable portions, and we are going with what our legal advisors have told us. So the portion used for religious purposes, religious worship, is considered the portion just used solely for worship.
Your legal advice, is this internally or externally from within council, has said that...
We have had both internal and external legal advice on this.
Right, so you've extensively sought out whether you can. Have you thought about whether you should?
We just have to comply with legislation. So I don't think there's been any case law on this so far, but this is the advice that we've received.
And what about engaging with the political side of council, so councillors and the mayor? Did you do that at any point?
So this was initially kicked off at the beginning of 2016, and we've been reporting to the Finance and Performance Committee every quarter. Also, we sent all the councillors a memo when we were issuing correspondence to the churches so that they knew about it.
So councillors aren't reading the memos?
Well, we didn't get anything back to tell us not to go ahead and do it. So,
did you ever have any contact from the mayor about this?
We had discussions at Finance and Performance Committee at which the mayor was in attendance, but yeah.
Did he ever comment on it?
Not directly to me, no.
In 6 months' time, after a decision has been made, if the decision is to not enact any new policy, so these rates are as they currently are, you just told me that you don't want any churches to close. What could you do for a church that is facing having to close?
Well, as we do for any ratepayer who's struggling to pay their rates, we can look at options for them. So we always encourage people to call us and talk to us if they're having trouble paying.
And what are those options?
We've got, well, as I was talking about, we've got postponement, we've got the ability to spread the payments out to as often as weekly, which can make a big difference to some organisations.
But at the end of the day, those rates would still have to be paid? Yes,
they would, unless there was a policy change.
Right, so short of the councillors and the mayor, you understand what I'm getting at, there's nothing that can be done?
Yep, so we just need to wait and see what happens with that political discussion.
It's absolutely fascinating, this business. So that's Debbie Acott talking to Zach Fleming. The political discussion Debbie referring to is going to take place. We will report on it. Of course, by golly, your feedback is divided. I think almost, well, it's hard to say because there's so much of it, but it feels like it's 50-50. Hi, John. Of religious groups, this rates increase can't be confined to Christian institutions alone. Care about their places of worship. Why can't they pay for them themselves rather than being subsidised via special tax? Via special tax and rates treatment. Taxes ought to provide more reliable support for community services than charities. It's only fair, do unto others and all. I'm sure Jesus would be down with that, says Ganya. But, well, lots of people saying, actually think of the work, the really good work churches do, the fact that churches are maybe asset rich but really cash poor, and they simply won't be able to meet their rates. Lots of people say Brian Tamaki is not a good example and he should be paying rates on his churches. Fascinating feedback. We're going to investigate. Lots of people asking if marae have to pay rates. We don't know the answer to that question, but we will, by golly. Thank you for asking. It's a good one to investigate. Charities, yeah, most people do have to pay rates. We appreciate your feedback. You can hear the theme winding up underneath me. They're still flooding in as I speak. Thanks for being with us tonight on Checkpoint. We appreciate your company. Have a great evening. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police in Whanganui have arrested several people as they continue their investigation into the fatal shooting of Kevin Ratana last week. Lawyers for 2 prison guards accused of an attack on a prisoner say they didn't intend to harm him. Hospitals are employing people to use the emergency department only if they're seriously ill, with record numbers flooding in over the past week. And a new scholarship will give high-achieving New Zealand science students the chance to work with NASA's leading researchers. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Worlds of Music is a world music program with a difference. Every week we present an eclectic mix of world music, fusion and folk roots from all over the planet. The program includes a variety of artists, interviews and musical curiosities. An hour of music from the world for the world. Join me, Trevor Iki, on Worlds of Music, Tuesday